Chapter 351 Japan U-17 versus Poland U-17-7. In the first half, apart from using his skill fireball shot, he hadn't had any opportunities to display the potential of his skill lightning steps. But right now, at this moment, with an opportunity present right in front of his eyes, how could he let go of such an important opportunity? Sure, given his position, the opportunity wasn't that great. And there was also a possibility of an outcome where he wouldn't make it to the ball in time. Also, the opposing left back himself was a great sprinter. Especially his solo runs, they were really impressive. Even the reason he was an attacking fullback was all thanks to those fast legs of his, which allowed him to swiftly switch between offense and defense. The audience, upon witnessing this thrilling moment, became extremely excited as almost every eye in the stadium focused on the two particular players who were competing for the ball while running like wild horses on steroids. Others were also chasing after the ball, but none were as fast as those two. Though, one had it rather easy while the other faced several obstacles on his way. With opposing players trying to block his way in an attempt to slow his speed, Hiro had to keep on constantly changing his direction, which was hampering his speed. Yet, he kept on accelerating like crazy every time he changed his direction. It wouldn't have been possible for a human to constantly accelerate while changing her direction without losing his slash or speed. But with the use of his skill lightning steps, which allowed him to achieve his top acceleration in less than a second, he could retain his speed nonstop no matter how many times he had to change his direction. And most of the players of the opposing team had simply assumed that he could showcase that burst of acceleration only once based on the analysis of his previous matches. Unaware of the fact that he could spam his acceleration nonstop as long as the skill lightning step was in effect, they made a huge blunder. And this blunder was bound to cost him a lot. Reaching the ball before the opposing left back could reach it, he caught the ball right at the foot of the outline, barely saving it from going out of bounds. And the moment he reached the ball, the effect of the skill, lightning steps waned as well. But since he hadn't used his skill before in the first half, he used it again without any hesitation alongside his skill perseverance. Sure, he was not exhausted yet, and sure the path in front of him was quite open, but still, he wasn't willing to take any chances. Who knows if another opportunity, such as now, would come or not afterwards. It's better to give your all now when you've got the chance instead of waiting for another opportunity that might or might not come later. Spamming his skill lightning steps, he then sprinted towards the open goal. Witnessing the sight of Hiro, who was rushing towards him, the opposing keeper felt a tingling sensation as he vigorously rolled his eyes around him, trying to analyze his situation. Polsky won't make it, but his teammates won't make it as well. So, he'll have to come all by himself. Looking at his teammates and the opposing players, he started to think as he deducted the possible situation he'd find himself in. At this moment, he realized that neither would his teammates come to his rescue, nor would the opposing players would come to Hiro's rescue. The fate of his team depended solely on him. And based on all those videos he had watched featuring Hiro, he knew how dangerous Hiro could be. Not only could he shoot a stunner, but he was also capable of cheeky shots. A player of such caliber who excelled in both power and technique was a nightmare to face. Still, he had to decide whether to confront him or stick by his post. Alas, after much thinking, he concluded that it would be better to limit his opportunity by not allowing him any gaps than to wait behind for him to get close. Leaving behind his post, he then rushed towards Hiro, intending to snatch the ball away from his feet before he could even release the ball. But that didn't mean that he wasn't putting his guard up to prepare himself for any possible cheeky chips. Just in a few seconds, those two found face to face against each other. The opposing keeper, although a bit nervous, didn't show a slight bit of nervousness on his face. Similarly, Hiro appeared as cold as ice and as solid as a mountain. Not even a speck of fear or hesitation could be seen on his face. Moreover, he didn't even look at the ball. Instead, he stared at the opposing keeper right in his eyes. For some reason, Hiro's eyes appeared rather ferocious at the moment. It was like the eye of an apex predator, sharp and intimidating. Would he try to dribble past me, or will he shoot? Concentrating on the ball, the opposing keeper thought as he tried to figure out Hiro's motive. Though he was intimidated by those cold stares of Hiro, which appeared as if it could see right into his soul, he still retained his senses nonetheless and didn't black out. He had to remain as rational as possible, and only then would he be able to stop this abomination of a man headed towards his way. Their coach, upon witnessing this clash, was growing restless with every passing second. The condition of the players in their substitution box was particularly the same, restless and scared. All of a sudden, their pupils enlarged as some of them jerked a little, pulling back their heads a little. The reaction was almost similar to that of the feeling of falling off of a cliff in a dream. And what caused them to feel such a feeling was a 14-year-old boy who was way younger than most of them. Appearing as if he was about to make his move, Hiro kicked the ball with the outside of his boot, sending the ball rolling toward the right. The opposing keeper followed suit. Hiro then stretched his legs, preparing to shoot. Though there was less than a 10% chance of the opposing keeper saving his shot from this angle, he still was about to take this chance. Then, he swung his right foot toward the ball. Just at this moment, the opposing keeper launched his body, stretching his body to its utmost limit, trying to cover that tight angle where Hiro was probably aiming. But he missed the ball, or so he made it appear. From the beginning, he was only acting so to lure the opposing keeper into believing that he was aiming for the tight spot. And the opposing keeper fell for his plot. Goal! Chapter 352, Japan U17 versus Poland U17 end. A burst of euphoric roar erupted forth in the stadium as a change occurred in the scoresheet finally after so long. Japan U17 1 versus Poland U17 0. After successfully tricking the opposing keeper, Hiro slotted a goal in an empty post, giving his team the much-desired lead in the 74th minute of the match. Japan's ace has done it. He has finally given his team the much-needed push, alongside the euphoric roars of celebration. The commentator's loud voice, full of praise, echoed in the stadium as the ambience of the stadium became extremely electrifying. At this moment, all of his teammates rushed toward him with their eyes glistening with elation. For the first time in this entire match, the momentum was on their side. And for almost every single one of them, it was their first goal against a team from Europe. So, why wouldn't they feel excited about it? They had all the reason in the world for them to feel euphoric at the moment. And the players of Japan showed no hesitation to express those feelings on the field. As much as this goal meant the world to his teammates, it meant the world to Hiro as well. In his previous life, he couldn't even imagine standing on this stage, let alone scoring a goal against such a team that had given birth to the likes of world-renowned players like Robert Lewandowski, SSS, SNY, and many more. Overcome by disappointment and rage, the opposing manager was stomping his feet on the field while hauling curses at his players. "You shitheads! How could you not even manage to stop one player?" Meanwhile, his assistant coaches were trying to calm him down. They were afraid that if he continued to act this way, he might get booked by the referee. Compared to the scene at the reserve box on the Polish side, the scene at the Japanese side was quite different. With both the coaches and players celebrating the lead their team had gained, sounds of laughter and excitement were ringing around in their reserve box. At this time, both supporters and players of Japan had come together and were in perfect unison, sharing the same feeling of elation. Truly, it was a moment of joy and celebration for the Japanese side. The celebration lasted for a while as the players of Japan shared this dream-like moment of joy with their fans, yelling and shouting at the top of their lungs. The serene night sky only added beauty to this beautiful moment playing on the field, with stars seemingly appearing as glitters and the moonlight shining on them, appearing as a blessing bestowed upon them from the heavens. Looking at his teammates who were far on the other side of the field, Shun revealed a subtle grin as he whispered to himself, "And here he goes, stealing my hard-earned limelight in no time." Today, if not for him, his team would have already crumbled. And when Hiro was failing to deliver, he stepped in front when his team needed hope the most. Yet now, it appeared as if none of them remembered him. Being a goalkeeper, he was quite aware of the fact that he couldn't be in the limelight like strikers or other players who score goals for the team. But still, he couldn't deny that it felt a little depressing to get forgotten so quickly. However, it didn't mean that he wasn't happy for his team or was envious of Hiro or other attacking players. As much as the audience who supported his team was happy about the goal, he was happy about it in the same way. Since there was still a lot of time left on the clock, they couldn't afford to get overcarried by the joy of scoring this goal. It was still too early to celebrate. They then started returning to their respective position to continue the game. While returning, Hiro walked a bit deeper into his side, toward the penalty box. But since he couldn't afford to waste more time, he didn't go all the way to the post. Instead, he stood at a distance from where Shun could still hear him. "Why, Shun," he called out for Shun. "Yeah, what?" Shun replied, while looking a bit curious and surprised. "Make sure you fulfill your promise," pointing at the scoreboard. Hiro spoke while grinning. Following his hands as he looked at the scoreboard, he immediately realized what Hiro was talking about right now. He was asking him to defend their lead. A moment ago, he had confidently promised Hiro that he would defend their post at all costs, and right now, when he had finally gained the upper hand with this goal, he was asking him to fulfill his promise by defending their lead. Smiling, he then replied, "Leave it to me." Beep. What a breathtaking match we've witnessed today. But I'm sure the coaches of the Argentinian side would be analyzing this match thoroughly later on, looking for areas to improve as they go face-to-face against the Japanese side, who have narrowly defeated their opponents with a score of 1-0 a moment ago. After an intense 90 minutes, the game between Argentina U17 and Senegal U17 finally ended with Senegal U17 clinching the victory. Not only did they win this game, they utterly destroyed the Argentinian side by overpowering them in the entire match. Though the scoreboard read as such, Argentina U17 won versus Senegal U17 2. Senegal had dominated the entire match, and even the only goal scored by the Argentinian team was in the 91st minute, which was scored by Mateo after coming off the bench. It was barely a consolation goal. I'm sure many of the Argentinian players and fans would like to forget this match, as it was nothing more than humiliation. And with this defeat, both Argentina and Poland have lost one game each, while Japan and Senegal have both won their first group match, bringing them one step closer towards the knockout. At this moment, while the players of both teams were slowly making their way out of the stadium, the limelight was focused on a player called Amara from Senegal who had managed to score twice in this game. Chapter 353, Takashi's Discomfort. Inside a finely decorated room, illuminated by the golden lights of the setting sun creeping in from the window, Shun remained seated on the floor, imitating different yogic gestures. Currently, he was in the middle of his conditioning exercises. Two beds were in front of him, positioned side by side with room between them. One seemed rather unkempt, while the other rather well kept. However, this did not imply that only one was occupied while the other remained vacant. The neatly folded garments atop the well-kept bed were a testament to the fact that two individuals shared this room, each bed having its owner. With nothing besides his breathing echoing in the room appeared rather serene and dreamy. Knock! Knock! Suddenly, amidst his conditioning drills, he heard a knock on the door. The knock wasn't too shrill or weak. "The door's open," he said as he continued with his task. Clack! A clacking sound resonated as the handle of the door twisted before the person on the outside gently pushed the door open. Slowly as the door opened, Takeshi, whose brows were knotted into a frown and was carrying a rather dejected expression, made his appearance. "Sorry for the disturbance," he spoke apologetically, pushing the door open. "No worries, and don't mind me. I'm just doing some conditioning exercises," Shun replied casually, continuing with his activity. Takeshi then humbly stole glances around the room, hoping to find Hiro. But, aside from Shun, he couldn't find anyone here, which only added to his already damp mood. The sole purpose of his visit was to talk to Hiro. Noticing Takeshi's frown, Shun recalled an incident from yesterday's battle against Poland as he realized his purpose of visit, looking for Hiro. Currently, even with all his efforts to hide his intentions, Takeshi was like an open book, and not only Shun, but almost anyone on the team could tell what he was thinking at the moment. However, Takashi himself wasn't aware of that fact. Thus, for a split second when he heard Shun's inquiry, he couldn't help but feel taken aback. His reaction, however, only confirmed Shun's inquiry. Shun then immediately returned to his normal position and asked while addressing his anxious expression, "Why are you so hung up on that matter? We won the match, right? Plus, Hiro himself has not mentioned anything about that matter. So, why are you troubling yourself?" In yesterday's match, they could have won the match with a score of 2-0 instead of 1-0. In the 91st minute of the match, after making a brilliant solo run from the half line, even when he had the opportunity to score by himself, Hiro selflessly passed the ball to Takashi. And all he had to do was to tap the ball inside an empty net, and they could have easily doubled their lead. But he couldn't capitalize on the opportunity created by Hiro and instead shot the ball awry, flying into the stand. Shun's words were assuring, but it wasn't effective enough to lighten his mood, especially after seeing a devastated expression of Hiro after the match. How could he bring himself to forget about that matter so easily? After the match, while everybody celebrated their first victory, Hiro appeared rather sad and irritated. It was almost as if he wasn't satisfied with their team's victory. But that wasn't the first time he had witnessed that expression of Hiro. Just a moment after firing the ball into the stand, failing to capitalize on the opportunity created by Hiro, he had seen that same expression filled with grief and rage. Although others didn't think much of that matter regarding him missing a possible opportunity that could have doubled their lead, after catching a glimpse of Hiro's expression, he knew for a fact that Hiro cared about that opportunity more than anyone else. That opportunity he had created truly meant something to him that others weren't aware of. Sure, he didn't speak anything, nor did he blame him for the miss. In fact, after the game, he even consoled him regarding that miss. But even so, he could feel the sadness hidden behind that face and voice of his, which is why he had come to apologize to him right now. The guilt of not scoring that goal had even cost him his sleep. Forcing a smile on his face, he thanked Shun for his kind words. "Yeah, I'll try to forget that. Thanks for worrying about me. But I'd still like to apologize to Hiro. After all, he had worked so hard for that opportunity, and I just blew it away. It wouldn't do him justice if I didn't apologize, would it?" He added, sounding extremely sincere. At this moment, he didn't sound like he was blaming himself. It sounded like he truly wanted to apologize to Hiro for missing out on that opportunity as his teammate. Takashi's sincerity managed to move his heart, and even Shun was left speechless upon hearing his true feelings. It truly was as mentioned by him. Right now, he only wanted to apologize to Hiro, not because he was trying to get rid of the feeling of guilt he was feeling, but to soothe Hiro, who had created that opportunity. It wasn't about him, it was about Hiro. Shun then pointed outside the window and spoke. "Usually he should be back by now, but maybe it's really as you said. He might be bothered by that miss." The hotel they were lodging at the moment, though it didn't have any football field, still had a huge, finely trimmed grassy field. They were also kind enough to permit the players to use it for recreational activities, which included playing mini football or simply practicing football. And right now, Hiro was at that field, expressing his frustration on the ball and his body. Though it wasn't he who had missed that opportunity, still that didn't mean his performance was good in yesterday's match. For the entire first half, he was rendered basically useless. And though he improved his performance in the second half, he still couldn't create many chances for his teammates, which meant the failure of the quest solely lay on him. It wasn't Takashi who was responsible for the failure of the quest. It was he who had failed that quest provided by the system in that match against Poland. Chapter 354 Handicapped. Huff, huff. Panting heavily while completely bathed in perspiration as he ran circuits around the field he was currently in, Hiro kept his legs going despite the pain that was coursing through his legs. It had already been over 2 hours since he began running, and God knows how many laps he had already completed. To forget that incident from yesterday, Hiro had been tirelessly running laps around the field, deliberately trying to exhaust himself. But even with all these efforts, he couldn't bring himself to forget about yesterday's match. Yesterday, though they had won the game, But at what cost? It was at the cost of losing two of his most cherished skills for the next game, lightning steps and hawk eyes. Sure, even without those skills, he was still pretty fast and aware. But the element of surprise those skills brought along with it, he could never imitate by solely relying on himself. And also considering the importance of the upcoming match, it was really a poor time to lose those skills. With two fewer skills, his performance would for sure be affected in the upcoming match, not to mention the threat that was heading their way. After that shitty display in the previous match, it was almost guaranteed that the Argentinian team would bounce back even stronger. With such worries in his mind, he couldn't bring himself to forget about the matter of losing two of his most useful skills. Suddenly, he came to an abrupt stop as he came up against Takashi. Without beating around the bush, even before Takashi could open his mouth, Hiro spoke briskly, albeit sounding a little out of breath. "I already told you yesterday, it's not your fault. So, you don't have to apologize." But those words had no effect on him, and neither did it console him nor convince him to head back. He was still adamant about his decision to apologize to Hiro. Waiting for Hiro to complete his sentence, Takashi stood there wearing a solemn look on his face. Then, just as Hiro finished his sentence, he spoke. "Yes, you said it yesterday too. But I still feel like I owe you an apology. I can't just act as if nothing happened after spilling water on your efforts." "I'm sorry, Hiro," Takashi continued after pausing for a moment to breathe, as if to filter his thoughts or to muster up some courage. Dragging this matter would only lengthen the conversation, which Hiro desperately wanted to avoid right now. He wanted to forget about that incident so that he could focus his attention on the next match, cool-headedly. And just to clear his mind, he had been running tirelessly to the point that his feet were starting to convulse with pain. But now Takashi was ruining his effort by bringing that matter. Unwilling to speak more on this matter, Hiro then accepted his apology. "It's all right. If you're really apologetic, then just do your best in the next game. If you do that, I'll consider that you're sincerely sorry about yesterday." Upon hearing Hiro's response, Takashi felt as if a burden was lifted off of his shoulder. If Hiro had said otherwise or tried to console him by saying that it wasn't his fault, he would have felt really sad. But now that Hiro acknowledged his true feelings, he was really happy about it. A smile bloomed on his face as he nodded his head and answered in a rather determined and cheerful tone, "I'll do my best." Sure, by agreeing with him, Hiro avoided talking further on this matter. Truth be told, he wasn't bothered in the slightest by that miss from Takashi. If it had happened other days, he would have simply smiled. But yesterday, he was only bothered by it because of the quest. If it were not for the quest, let alone being bothered by it, he wouldn't have paid it any heed at all. Inside a brightly illuminated room, a silhouette of a person could be seen while at the same time, some scribbling noises could be heard. "That's right, now I get it," the person mumbled enthusiastically as he took some steps back from the board in front of him. His brown eyes, which were looking at the board, was glistening with realization and excitement. "If I play Mateo in the middle, our formation would be much more stable, and I should probably move him to the right." Mumbling such, he treaded forward toward the board. Raising the marker he held in his hand, he then started to scribble again. After a while, he heard a sudden knock on the door. "Knock! Knock!" Right after the knock, a husky voice echoed from outside the door. "Diego, it's me, Gonzalez." Diego Placini, who right now was 47 years old, was the head coach of the Argentinian U17 team. A rather young fellow among most of the coaches present in the tournament, his appearance defied his age. With barely any visible wrinkles on his face, a rather clean-shaven face and lush, deep brown hair devoid of any gray hair, he had a rather handsome, manly appearance. "Come inside," Diego spoke while continuing with his task. Twisting the handle, Gonzalez slowly pushed open the door and entered the room. "Have you figured out what changes you wanted to make in the team?" Gonzalez questioned as he entered the room, his tone sounding rather polite but still hiding the urgency behind it. Gonzalez, his assistant coach, albeit a lot older than him, was rather respectful towards Diego. And it wasn't simply because he was his senior. It was also because of the talent Diego possessed and his attitude. Diego, however, didn't reply to his inquiry and kept on going with his task. Taking notice of Diego's actions, Gonzalez, too, didn't pester him further on that matter. Instead, he moved closer towards Diego and patiently awaited his reply. Diego then lifted his marker and retracted some step. "What do you think of it?" Diego asked. Gonzalez took a look at the board, and the more he looked at it and tried to understand it, the more he was drawn into it. Chapter 355, Dissatisfaction and New Strategy. Mesmerized by the tactics that Diego had come up with, he was hooked by those changes made in their previous formation. Those changes, although they didn't seem groundbreaking, still pinpointed almost every single flaw in their game against Senegal. If only those changes would have been made earlier, they might not have lost so miserably. In going through those tactics, Gonzalez could tell that the performance of their team could increase drastically if they could execute it perfectly without fail. "It's brilliant, but you'll be pushing aside Claudio," Gonzalez answered, sounding rather worried. Though he believed that these changes would help his team win, he was also worried about the strife that it'd bring along with it. Especially the matter regarding swapping the position of one of their starter, Claudio Echeverri, and bringing Mateo in his place, who until now was playing as a substitute. Claudio, being one of their main men, definitely wouldn't agree with the changes. And being a coach, he had to consider every factor before making any changes. "We'd have more use of him in the front line than in the midfield," Diego answered without any hesitation. It seemed that Diego was adamant about making such changes, and nothing would change his mind. "And I believe that he'll have more impact that way," Diego concluded. Giving in to Diego's persistence, Gonzalez let out a soft sigh before submitting to his will. "Well, you're the coach." Spreading its warm rays while casting several shadows across the vast landscape as the sun made its appearance. Slowly, the velvety layer of dark canvas that was veiling the sky started to lift, and a beautiful scene full of orange and pink hues unfolded in the once dark and ominous sky. At this time, a bunch of silhouettes could be seen moving alongside a certain grassy field. Those silhouettes belonged to the Argentinian players who right now were running laps around the field and were in the middle of their morning training. From the sidelines, Diego, alongside his coaching staff, was keeping watch on his players. As the players approached closer to him, he took his whistle out of his pocket. Trapping the whistle between his lips, he then blew it loudly. Beep! It was a signal for the players to gather around Diego. And, upon hearing the sound of the whistle, at once all of the players increased their pace as they dashed towards Diego, heeding his call. Making an arc around Diego, they then gathered around him, awaiting his command to kickstart the morning training. Diego harumphed and said, "It's been 2 days since that match, and I'm sure you all must be wondering why I haven't spoken anything regarding that matter until now, right?" Exactly as mentioned, Diego hadn't spoken anything regarding their loss until now, which had left everyone on the team wondering. But now that he mentioned the topic of their loss so abruptly, they were left rather perplexed by the timing. Why mention it now? Shouldn't we be discussing about our tomorrow's match? What's the point of mentioning that now? As they heard Diego's statement, many of them couldn't help but think so. And they weren't wrong to think such as well. After all that's happened has already happened, instead of worrying about the past that has passed, it would be better to focus on the matter at hand. Though they had several thoughts which greatly contradicted the topic their head coach was about to present, none of them actually dared to speak their mind. They just kept their mouths shut and stood there waiting for the talk Diego was about to present. Diego was no mind reader, but he could tell that they weren't eager to listen about their mistakes now when they had another game in hand. However, it didn't matter to him since he wasn't going to criticize their play in the first place. "It's because you all played so awfully that I didn't even feel like talking about it. And I'm still not going to talk about that match. Instead, what I want to talk about is the changes we've come up with so that we won't repeat the same mistakes." Diego outrightly criticized every single one of them and sternly announced his decision without giving a shit about anybody's feelings. At once, his decision caused an uproar as the players started becoming noisy, expressing their dissatisfaction regarding that abrupt decision of their coach. "But coach, we're in the middle of a tournament. What if it backfires? We've had only 2 matches, and if we lose even one, we might as well say goodbye to the tournament. Yeah, why change now? Beep. While they were grumbling, Diego blew his whistle forcefully to silence them. At once upon hearing the shrill sound of the whistle, everybody came to a pause as all of them stopped their grumbling. It would have been otherwise if any of them had enough influence to cause him to change his decision, but none of them were of that caliber yet. Thus, nobody had the guts to challenge the authority of Diego. Being the person with the highest authority in this team, they had to do whatever he told them. If he ordered them to run laps, they run without any complaints. If he told them to shut their mouth, they shut their mouth. Anybody who dared to speak against him would be challenging his authority and would only put himself in danger. After all, he had the authority to bench them or drop them. It would only do them good as long as they didn't fall out of favor with him. Thus, as the cacophonous sound of Diego's whistle chimed in, what followed was an eerie silence where only the sound of the collective breathing could be heard around them. Sweeping his gaze across the players, he spoke in a rather gentle tone, completely different from what the players were expecting. There won't be many changes, and it isn't an entirely different approach either. In fact, many of you are already familiar with it. So, don't worry unnecessarily. Just play freely like your usual self and have fun on the field. Chapter 356 Japan, U17 versus Argentina, U17I. November 14th, 2023. Jalak Harapat Stadium. Many people dressed in the colors of their respective teams were making their way towards the stadium, seemingly all excited. Most fans who appeared overtly excited were singing chants and waving flags, while at the same time, vendors lined the streets, selling merchandise and snacks to the hungry fans on their way to the match. With these crowds of excited fans flocking into the stadium, the surrounding area outside was quite crowded, almost as if a festival was taking place over there. And the air was rather electrifying with the fans' cheers, chatter, and chants. Such an excited atmosphere, however, wasn't only limited to the surroundings around the stadium, though a bit less intense than the one at the scene. The scene in different parts of Japan where people had gathered to watch this match was equally electrifying. Maybe it's because of the recent fame of the Argentinian side who had managed to clutch the title of the FIFA World Cup 2022, but though it wasn't their senior team playing, people of Japan were showing great interest in this match. Awaiting the start of the match, they were both nervous and excited. Lined up side by side, except for the explosive chants echoing from outside. Right now, it was rather silent inside the tunnel. For some reason, it appeared as if the players of both teams were equally nervous about this match. Just from their silence alone and the fact that none of the sides were clashing against each other, one could tell how tense both sides were for this match. Not being able to use 2 of his most precious skills, Hiro himself was unusually tense today. In a while, as they walked out of the tunnel, they were met with a stadium buzzing with a cacophonous symphony of cheers. Though the stadium appeared rather lively, for some reason, Hiro couldn't help but feel an unknown pressure weighing on him. The feeling was almost similar to the moment when he first stepped onto the field in the finals of the Takamoto Cup. As he trod forward, his heart raced with every step he took. Looking around him as he noticed those expectant eyes, his heart raced even faster. Immediately, he then rolled his eyes away from the crowd. Why am I feeling so nervous today? It's not like it's my first time seeing those eyes, then why? Walking with his head lowered, he thought as he tried to figure out why he was feeling so tense today. Was it perhaps fear? He couldn't be certain. But whatever the reason be, he couldn't bring himself to look in the eyes of the supporters today. Shun, however, seemed unaffected. Enjoying this moment to its fullest, he walked forward looking around him, radiating an aura of unwavering confidence. Receiving the highest rating surpassing even that of Hiro, he was the MVP, the star of the previous match. And he had brought the confidence of that match with him even in this match. Crack! Crack! While looking around him, enjoying the buzz of excitement lingering in the stadium, he cracked his knuckles, raring to go. If I can shut them down, even the clubs from overseas will have to take notice of me, Shun thought, flaring with passion to prove his worth. The ratings he had received in the previous match were a testament to his improvement. And if he could deliver even in this match, then it would only confirm that he indeed was growing. Yutaka, on the other hand, appeared as nervous as before, intentionally shrinking his body so that others won't take notice of him. Yutaka, as he trod forward, was desperately trying to hide his presence. Well, some could even argue that it was one of the reasons why he could move swiftly in the field. The less he gets noticed, the less the chance that anybody would mark him. Though it was as much as a blessing, it was also a curse, since he might not get noticed by his teammates as well. And what meaning would be there if he couldn't get the ball? After all, his greatest arsenal was his vision and passing. And if he couldn't get on the ball, then those blessings would render completely useless. Part of the reason why Yutaka wouldn't get passes often in the match was because of his inability to call for passes. He'd always move in silence, which often would get him ignored. Caressing the scar on his face while moving along with his teammate, Mateo looked at the stadium brimming with fans. Playing as a substitute until now, this experience of starting was completely unfamiliar to him. For a while, he couldn't believe whether all this was a dream or a reality. The buzzing crowd that was looking his way, the buzz of excitement lingering around the stadium, and the view he could get while walking out of the tunnel. It was such a magical experience that he couldn't even put it in terms of words. Suddenly, though, he felt an incredible feeling of pride, almost as if he had accomplished something major emerging from the depths of his heart. I've made it to the starting 11. Mom, Dad, Alexia, are you all watching me? Looking at the digital screen, he thought. Mateo was aware that the more exposure he got, the closer he'd get to achieving his dream. And right now, getting a place in the starting 11, he couldn't feel grateful towards his parents who urged him to take this chance. If not for them, let alone being here, he'd still be as lost as ever. Retracting his gaze from the scoreboard as he turned to look in front, he was met with the glare of Claudio, who appeared rather irritated. Getting in a scuffle with him after the end of the training session regarding the new strategy that the coach had come up with, Claudio was still holding a grudge against him for stealing his position. However, he wasn't the only one who was holding a grudge against him. The one who had been benched because of him was equally dissatisfied and angry as well. Chapter 357, Japan, U17 versus Argentina, U17-2. Turning to look at the stands, overflowing with excited cheers, Mateo felt a familiar surge of excitement tinged with a bit of anxiousness. Then again, to relieve his anxiousness, he clutched his hand into a fist and inhaled a deep breath. As he exhaled, his eyes glowed with an unusual sharpness. Beep! The air crackled with the roars of the fans as the referee blew his whistle, announcing the start of the game. Claudio passed the ball back to Mateo and dashed upfield. Nagichi, their attacker, rushed for the ball, ignoring Claudio, who easily passed him. At the same time, Hiro rushed towards Claudio, attempting to block him on his way, while everyone in the front line dispersed to cover more distance and maximize their effectiveness. Just as he was about to approach Claudio, Hiro, however, hesitated. Being aware of Mateo's capabilities, it would be more effective to head towards Mateo than to block Claudio. That is what he told himself. But that was merely a flimsy reason to appease his ego. The true reason he hesitated was pretty profound, and if expressed out loud, it would break his team. He just couldn't trust Nagichi to stop Mateo. It's not like he hated Nagichi or anything personal. He couldn't put his trust in Nagichi. But truth be told, Nagichi's defense was shit, and so was his patience. If Mateo gets past him, he won't even bother chasing him. That's why he couldn't put his trust in Nagichi. But even so, he couldn't let Claudio to pass him. Thus, he hesitated for a while whether to rush towards Mateo or guard Claudio. Then, amidst his hesitation, he looked behind. There Takashi was standing guard, appearing rather sharp and intimidating. Looking at that sturdy frame and piercing gaze of his, for some reason Hiro felt as if he could put his trust in him. Right at that moment, Takashi also turned toward him, and their eyes met. Gesturing to Takashi to cover for him, Hiro signaled that he would be leaving Claudio under his care. Understanding his signals, Takashi gave a light nod. Up front, Mateo easily dribbled past Nagichi. And what he had feared the most happened as well. After getting beaten, Nejichi refused to give him a chase, which allowed Mateo to operate even more freely. Mateo then moved the ball upfield unimpeded, looking for gaps to exploit. However, his independence did not last long since Hiro eventually caught up with him and stopped him from continuing ahead. Though Mateo was confident in his dribbling, he was also aware of Hiro's tenacity. Unlike Nejichi, Hiro wouldn't leave him alone even after getting past him. Taking everything into consideration, he then came to a decision. Moving forward with steady steps, he steeled his mind to face Hiro. Appearing as sharp as ever, Hiro too confronted him calmly. As those two confronted one another, their focus peaked, and they engaged in a war of wits, each attempting to outwit the other. With each of them being an excellent dribbler and observer, both of them were trying to read each other. For a while, the time froze as those two clashed. Mateo's body swayed like a leaf in the wind as he dribbled quickly and precisely. Hiro, who appeared calm as water, remained with him, tracking his every move and stopping him from moving forward. It was truly a battle between geniuses, and the excited audition experiencing this clash firsthand were thoroughly enjoying this moment. Appearing rather tensed, they remained seated at their seats as they glued their eyes on those two geniuses who right now were trying to overpower each other. Finally, a moment arrived when Mateo outsmarted Hiro. A moment barely enough to put some distance with him presented itself in front of Mateo as he finally managed to get the ball past Hiro. The crowd went wild as they witnessed the deadlock being broken. But even after being beaten, Hiro appeared as tenacious as ever as he quickly recovered and started to chase after Mateo. It hadn't even been a minute, and yet already the match had become such heated that the audience could hardly resist the surge of anticipation coursing through their veins. Right now, the whole stadium was buzzing with an aura of anticipation and excitement. Sensing the presence of Hiro, who was chasing after him, Mateo didn't keep hold of the ball for long and decided to let go of the ball. Though he was initially planning to pass the ball to his team's wingers, he noticed a gap up front where Claudio was making his run. Thus, he decided to take a gamble and lob the ball in front, above the head of the opposing players. Lobbing the ball above the heads of the opposing players, he supplied a brilliant through ball. But now it all depended on Claudio. At this moment, the managers of both teams were overcome with a tense feeling as both of them looked at the flying ball with their brows creased into a frown. Especially manager Haruki's time-worn wrinkles were as visible as ever. Meanwhile, Japan's players seated in the substitute box glanced at the ball with anxious expressions on their faces, and many of them clasped their fists tightly. Making use of his small but robust frame, just as Akutsu leaped toward the ball to make a clearance, Claudio gave him a light push which in turn imbalanced Akutsu. Claudio, however, was careful enough not to alert the referee into giving him a foul. Feeling the push, Akutsu looked in the direction of the referee as he cried for a foul. But the referee simply turned a blind eye to his appeal, almost as if he was ignoring him. The ball then dropped right behind Akutsu, missing him barely by an inch. Taking advantage of the moment, Claudio then fired a brilliant volley straight towards the post with the accuracy of a master archer. Go all! At once the crowd erupted into a jubilant roar as they celebrated Claudio's goal. In less than a minute, the Argentinian side took the lead. Chapter 358 Japan, U17 versus Argentina, U17-3. As the ball sailed past the reach of Shun and touched the back of the net, supporters of the Argentinian side shot forth from their seats as they began to celebrate the goal scored by Claudio with much passion and excitement. With their ecstatic cries echoing throughout the stadium, for a moment it felt as if the entire venue had come to life. Overjoyed, Claudio, who had delivered Argentina their first lead of the game, upon scoring this marvelous goal, rushed toward the sidelines to celebrate. His teammates followed after him, but Mateo, who had assisted him, stayed put at his place, grinning. Amidst this raging celebration, the disappointed sighs and cries of the Japanese fans could barely be heard. But even if it was not as audible, it wasn't non-existent. If the cheers of the opposing fans weren't already heart-wrenching enough, the nagging of the commentator was even more brutal. Glorifying the Argentinian side, he harshly criticized the mistakes of the Japanese players who had failed to stop the Argentinian side and conceded a goal so early in the match. While the players of the Japanese side were devastated by this early blow, the head coach of the Argentinian side and his coaching staff were overjoyed. Though it was still too early to celebrate, they could see a glimpse of the success this last-minute change would bring to their team. "Diego, I think it might work," excitedly spoke Gonzalez. Diego nodded his head as he responded with a smile. Turning to look at the celebrating figure of his players, he just couldn't stop smiling even for a second. Since their World Cup qualifying matches, he had been painstakingly working on a strategy that could possibly make his team the world champions. But he hadn't been able to come up with a suitable one. The main reason why he couldn't come up with a good strategy was because of his unfamiliarity with the players. Despite being the head coach of the team, he barely knew the traits of his players. And even that was all thanks to the report provided to him by the association. But now he was slowly understanding the traits of his players, which had allowed him to work on a better strategy that could utilize the traits of his players to the fullest. One such example was the conversion of Claudio from an attacking midfielder to a striker. Though he wasn't planning on sticking with this same strategy for the rest of the tournament, as even the strategy he had conjured right now had its flaws. But for now, he was satisfied with the result. While his coaching staff and his players celebrated the goal they had scored, Diego stood upright with his arms folded and eyes glistening with pride. On the other hand, manager Haruki was trying to console himself by saying that they still had the entire match to turn around the score. Unlike his colleagues, Kazan, who was seated at his seat wearing a poker face, appeared as if he was neither bothered by the outcome nor worried about the game ahead. Just by looking at his face, one could barely tell what he was thinking. But at this moment, though he wasn't showing any emotions or expressing his disappointment, he was the one who was thinking the most in the reserve box of the Japanese side. They have changed their tactic, analyzing the performance of the opposing players, Kazan concluded. Amidst this gloomy atmosphere, at this moment, one would expect Hiro to sulk and despair like most of his teammates. But instead, right now, he had a weird smile on his face. Sure, this goal, as much as it pained his teammates and supporters, pained him as well. But going up against one of the finest talents he had seen until now, he just couldn't resist this urge to test himself. And that too when he lacked two of his most precious skills. Potential, SSS. He wanted to find out whether he truly had that inner potential or if it was because he possessed the system. So, if he truly possessed that innate ability, he should be able to hold on by himself without relying on the system. But if he couldn't hold his ground in today's match, it would confirm that he was nothing without the help of the system. Raring to find out if he was truly worthy or not, he then began to head back to Console Shun, who seemed the most devastated of the moment. Beep! With the referee's whistle, as everybody returned to their position, the game continued. With his newfound vigor, Hiro became even more offensive than before. However, his teammates struggled to keep up with him. Another missed pass from Hiro. What's happening to him today? He doesn't seem his usual self, commentator complained. Seems like even that kid is starting to get nervous. Gonzalez spoke. What do you think, Diego? He added as he asked for Diego's opinion, who was standing right beside him. In a rather prudent tone, Diego responded to Gonzalez's inquiry, or maybe it's his teammates who couldn't receive his pass. Upon hearing Diego's response, Gonzalez's eyes perked up as he couldn't help but ask in surprise, "What do you mean by that, Diego?" Exactly how it sounds, Diego answered in a rather ambiguous way. In the 44th minute of the match, a scenario arrived where Hiro found himself face to face against Matteo. At this encounter, almost everybody present on the stand became extremely curious and excited. The previous show-off between these players had left them thrilled. Was such a situation about to take place? Would Hiro get his revenge, or would Matteo come on top? Once again, they just couldn't help but feel curious. Steadily approaching Matteo, Hiro fearlessly darted his gaze towards Matteo, trying to intimidate him. But Matteo appeared as calm as the ocean. Intimidation wasn't going to work on him. He could tell just from looking into his eyes. And simple feints or deception wasn't going to work on him either. If he wanted to get past him, he'd have to do something totally unexpected. He'd have to catch him off guard. But that was easier said than done. Chapter 359, Japan U17 versus Argentina U17-4. Right now, almost every eye in the stadium was converged on Hiro and Matteo. With those two engaging in a thrilling battle of wills, the atmosphere of the stadium was getting rather heavy with anticipation. Twisting and turning his body, while executing fancy footwork, Hiro tried his best to beat Matteo. But Matteo was rather adamant. Following his every move, he nulled his efforts as if he could foresee every single one of his moves. It was really as if he knew where he'd move. Matteo was a very tough nut to crack, and from the looks of it, it didn't seem that getting past him would be an easy task. But Hiro had already prepared himself, and right now, he was playing without any restraint. Sure, he couldn't use two of his most useful skills, but he still had many other arsenals under his belt which he could use. Especially the talent, Equilibrium, which he had received from completing the recent quest. It was truly coming in handy. That talent had thoroughly boosted his dribbling to another level. Though it appeared as if Matteo wasn't even breaking a sweat, in reality, he was actually struggling to keep up with Hiro's fancy dribbles as well. Why does his dribbling style feel so familiar? While trying to keep up with Hiro, a strange feeling of nostalgia struck Matteo. Though he wasn't sure of this feeling, right now it felt as if he was playing against his carbon copy. Using Matteo's dribbling style, albeit with a touch of his flavors, one could say that right now, Hiro was using Matteo's dribbling style against him. And the reason why Matteo was having a hard time figuring it out was because of the modification Hiro had done. But still, it'd only be a matter of time before Matteo would eventually figure it out. It pains me to say it, but I gotta admit it, he's quite skilled, Gonzalez spoke while gritting his teeth, appearing rather anxious. That's right, he's copying me. Finally, Matteo figured out the strange feeling he was feeling, but how could he be so flawless? Having realized that Hiro was copying him, Matteo's eyes dilapidated as he felt a bone-chilling feeling. Not only the boy in front had managed to flawlessly copy him, but he had also modified his skills in a way that would suit him. For a moment, it truly felt as if he was looking at a genius. But then again, a feeling of joy overcame him. If he was copying him, then to some extent he'd be able to tell where he'd move the next moment. And, as predicted by him, Hiro did move toward the direction he had envisioned, which only added to his joy and satisfaction. Closing in toward him, he leaned his body towards Hiro, trying to block him while at the same time, he swept his feet, trying to snatch the ball away from Hiro. Slightly curling his lips, he revealed a satiated grin. "You're indeed skilled, but you shouldn't have thought of pulling my moves against me." That grin on his face, however, didn't last long. All of a sudden, his eyes converged as he became startled by Hiro's next move. It wasn't what he had envisioned. Pulling a rainbow flick out of nowhere, Hiro left him stunned. That once satiated grin on his face was replaced by a dumbstruck expression as he turned to look at Hiro, who had got past him. Whoa! The moment Hiro pulled that rainbow flick, a collective wow escaped the mouths of many onlookers as they were left utterly stunned by this marvelous display of skill. Then, with a burst of speed, he sped up, leaving behind Matteo. However, because of the lack of skill lightning steps, it took him a while to accelerate. Matteo, however, quickly recomposed his composure and started to give him chase. Soon enough, he was confronted with his next obstacle. Two opposing defenders stood before him, blocking his path. Yet, he remained unfazed. Right past them, he could see the post of the opposing team. Thus, he didn't let his focus waver after coming this far. Then, one of those defenders rushed toward him while the other followed him closely, glaring at him with vigilant eyes while appearing as if he would strike him any moment. As he got close to the incoming defender, in one breathtaking moment of brilliance, he then executed a brilliant move that left the entire stadium in stunned silence. However, no sooner had he got through the first defender than the other followed as he tried to recover their lost dignity. Hiro, however, Once again, with a lightning-quick feint sent the incoming defender sliding past him as he dodged both those defenders and locked his eyes on the goal. The crowd, upon witnessing this marvelous scene, became extremely tense and ecstatic. A hope blossomed in the heart of many supporters of Japan, on and off the pitch. "Come on, Hiro, you can do it." Many people cheered for him as he approached the post of the opposing team. In the blink of an eye, after leaving his pursuers in the dust, he appeared at the edge of the penalty box. Entering the penalty area, his talent knight in the area kicked in, boosting his attacking stat. His eyes flashed with an eerie sharpness as he prepared himself to take the shot. From there, he then unleashed a shot of unparalleled power and precision. As he struck the ball rocketed towards the post with unerring accuracy. But in the nick of time, it struck the pole and went astray. So close, yet so far. Both the commentator and the audience expressed their disappointment as they cried out loud, witnessing Hiro's miss. He rarely missed from that spot. But today, as if the god of bad luck had placed his hands atop his head, even after creating countless chances, he wasn't able to find the back of the net. It appeared almost as if he wasn't destined to score in today's match. Chapter 360, Japan, U17 versus Argentina, U17v. Appearing as if they were struck with a calamity, right now players of the Japan U17 team were slumped in their seats with their heads lowered. With none of them speaking, an unusual eeriness had engulfed their locker room. Still, despite that silence, the air around the room was rather heavy with a palpable sense of disappointment and frustration. Though their performance had been somewhat disappointing until now, apart from that very first goal, which they had conceded in the very first minute of the game, they hadn't conceded another goal. Yet, despite that, today it appeared as if everybody was thoroughly disappointed with their performance. Outside the locker room, manager Haruki, while making his way towards the locker room, accompanied by his coaching staff, appeared rather worried. With his brows knotted in a frown, he was wondering about the things he should say to motivate his players. Though they weren't losing miserably, but still after the halftime whistle, it appeared to him that his players seemed rather dejected, which shouldn't be the case. After all, they rarely reacted in such a way in any of the previous matches. Sure, they had made countless mistakes, but it shouldn't be enough to turn them this way. Their reaction was rather surprising. At first, he was just going to encourage them by telling them that apart from that very first mistake, they were doing quite well. But after witnessing their reaction, he just couldn't bring himself to execute his already thought plans. Unable to hear any noise escaping through the door of the locker room, manager Haruki felt his heart pounding as he approached close to the locker room. Usually, it would have been quite hectic right now, but today the locker room of his team was unusually silent. That silence, however, only added to his worries as he started feeling a little anxious. His anxiousness, however, only grew as he got close to the locker room. What was he going to tell them? Tell them that they have performed well until now? Or tell them to cheer up? Just what was he supposed to say? The closer he got to the locker room, the more such thoughts haunted him. However, he could only think of questions, but no answers came to him. Then as he stepped foot into the locker room, his mind went blank. It was almost as if he had entered a different dimension. It had been quite a long time since he started coaching these players, but it was his first time witnessing them in such a condition. Sure, he had seen them devastated countless times, but today, more than devastation, he could see anger in their eyes. And that fury was directed toward themselves and their helplessness, not at others. There was guilt hidden behind those eyes. All along, while making his way to the locker room, he had been wondering about what to say once he met his players. But now as he came against them, he no longer required to think. Those words he had been trying hard to come up with came naturally, as if it was present right in front of him, all along. I'm sure you all are aware of the performance you have put on the field until now. So, I'm neither going to talk about it, nor am I going to criticize you all. Manager Haruki's deep voice broke the air of silence lingering in the room. At once, as his voice resonated, many of the players turned to look at him, while a few continued to sulk, ignoring him. And neither am I going to instruct you, nor am I going to lecture you. But I'll say one thing. If you continue to let yourself be bothered by your performance in the first half, then I can tell with certainty that we'll be even more miserable in the second half. So, it's all up to you whether you want to learn from your mistakes or drown in the guilt of your mistakes. Saying so, Manager Haruki turned around and left the locker room. Based on the way he spoke and the way he reacted, it appeared that he was serious about what he meant. He wasn't going to speak more than this. Witnessing this strange, never-before-seen actions of Manager Haruki, other coaches were left perplexed. The head coach had walked out of the locker room without saying much, letting the players decide for themselves. They could have never expected that Manager Haruki, who was the epitome of professionalism, would do such an unprofessional thing. Now, what were they supposed to do? Instruct the players about the strategy? Or try to lift this gloomy mood in the locker room through some pep talk? None had any idea. Utterly perplexed, they just stood there awkwardly looking at each other's faces, trying to think about the actions they should be performing. After a short moment of rest, as the break came to an end, players from both teams started to enter the field. Each looked completely different than what they looked like when they exited the field after the whistle that concluded the first half. While the opposing team had made some changes to their formation, the players of Japan, after that abrupt declaration of their coach during the break, had entered the field with the same set of players with no changes in their formation. Yet despite all that, they appeared more sharper than ever. Even the coaching staff of the Japanese side, other than Manager Haruki and Kazan, were surprised at their transformation. After Manager Haruki walked out of the locker room, having no idea on what to do, they too had walked out of the locker room. Thus, they were completely unaware of the stuff that happened in the locker room afterward. But now, upon witnessing such drastic changes despite having said nothing, they couldn't help but feel surprised at their transformation. What just happened in the locker room? With their eyes widened, the coaching staff of the Japanese side thought as they perplexingly looked at the figure of their players walking out the aisle.